You know, as I go, I find it kind of meditative. And it's one of those examples of where it's something, the self-accomplishment of doing something that, for a lot of people, talk about therapy and all that. But I find that for a man, purpose and accomplishment to some degree are their own form of therapy. So I just want to talk about this topic. And probably a number of others bring this up. This is Freedom Phil, like, subscribe. Let's get into it. And I'll always turn up the video speed. You should watch me at least at 1.75, maybe 150. You're a normal type. Yeah. By the way, always sub horn. Appreciating the subs. What am I getting at with this statement? I've never been about lawns. I think lawns are an incredible waste of ground, dirt, water, poisons, killing off everything. But as I work on my lawn and pull all the weeds, one might say, why don't you just use a bag of fertilizer? Well, it's been quite dry. And normally what I would do, classically, way back in the day, is I would take the time to pull all the weeds, then put a good weed and feed down. But I'm a little worried if I do that at this point, it might burn the lawn and do even more damage. But at some point, kind of checking off a lot of the internet. Like I was listening to the history of different scientists. Was it Socrates or the guy that made the lens? In ancient Greece. Or they burned the ship. I can't remember his name. Just heard it last night. But I'm sitting there listening to that, and I'm listening to the radio, like crap talk radio, and listening to music as I pull weeds. And as I get through with a quadrant, an area of where these weeds are, one by one, I can look at it and there's some sense of accomplishment. And it feels good. And it's kind of like I do kind of get this concept of gardening, basically where you can't generally buy a piece of paradise if you're a normal person. You can buy a piece of land and build your own paradise if you know how to garden. Some people are going to have that lakefront property. If you invest well when you're young, you could have it too, but reality is the cost of some things is just over the top. It's not worth it. But your own personal garden, whether it's a traditional English garden, flowers, or maybe you go full hippie and you do kind of like if you had a wild plot of land and you planted things that were already kind of natural to the area, or just does well, like making a bee garden. Who knows, maybe even be able to claim it on your taxes, because you're making bee habitat. But yeah, man, I've never cared for lawns, but there is something about it that I could see where it's totally meditative and trying to keep your lawn at its perfect deal there. And by the way, anybody who showed up here, I'm mostly just recording this, appreciating likes and subs. But yeah, that whole feeling of going out there and taking a piece of, disorder and taming it into something that's nice and beautiful. I like that. And the whole thing of people are alone. I think most people are afraid of solitude. And the reason for that is we're conditioned to be herd animal creatures, basically sacrificing a certain amount of ourselves every day. And you see this more and more with a lot of men, where for the women, for the children, for the society, the never-ending list of demands put on the average man. To some degree, I would see where at the end of a long week, a man going out and working in his yard, taking pride in his home, his property, his lawn, I could totally get that. Because, let's be honest, modern society, even though we have it really good, does ask a lot of people, especially your average man, work 40 to 60 hours a week, generally for people that may or may not appreciate what you do. You come home, and that's one of the things I thought was interesting in some of the philosophy or videos I was watching, where they were talking about how common it is for people to act like, especially the wives and the individuals, to act like, well, you just going to work, that must be great. Really? Unless you really love your job. No, for the most part, it's a lot of soul-sucking bullshit to make a lot of people happy, and then it's very thankless. I've seen many a men where basically after all they do, they deal with the nagging, the kids doing stupid stuff, where the man is basically treated like a joke to some degree, which that leads you to the kind of the answer why so many men you see these days are basically checking out. They're just like, they're doing their own thing, they're going their own way, they're doing whatever. But still, to some degree, as a refuge in the storm of just boring modernity that we live in, yeah, sometimes I could see where a guy would really like to have, like, he'd like really like his hedges a certain way. He'd really like his lawn just right. And I think there is something kind of beautiful about that. Even though I'm not a lawn person, I'm more of a, out in the woods, let it grow wild type of person. I understand for fire danger reasons, keep this low, or, weeds and all that. But yeah, I could totally see where you can build your own little piece of paradise. You've got your bulbs that come up this time of the year. You get your flowering plants that do this, your hanging baskets. And it's something that, even if it's just a small patch of ground, even in the city, even if you're you just got a deck, or not a deck, like you're in an apartment, you got a porch. It's something you can do. Kind of like the whole concept of the bonsai, where a guy takes a tree and slowly crafts it into this beautiful little sculpture of a plant. I can totally get where people would be really meditative about that, And there's something to it. It's like a refuge in the storm of sorts. And that whole thing I said on the flavor text on the thumbnail. What I'm referring to, I think it was Sun Tzu that said it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And so much of life, crafts you to be, well, more or less a gardener, a serf to some degree. But if you're truly a warrior to some degree, and I'm not saying I am, but you go home and you have this piece of refuge where you can put down, everything, all the day-to-day tools and of trade and war and all this crap, and actually have a spot to center yourself. And there's so many other things. I think just like gardening, I believe, is somewhat therapeutic for people. It could be hunting, it could be fishing, it could be sports. That's the thing I think a lot of people differ. Like, women talk about their problems, and a lot of times women don't even want to solve their problems. They just want someone to listen to their problems. Men understand that nobody gives a shit about their problems. So maybe they turn a wrench on a car. Maybe they have a beautiful yard and a productive garden, And so I think it's kind of just an interesting world we live in the sense that your own little piece of paradise just in your yard or your backyard. And I look back at some of the gardens. I remember my grandparents had a really nice yard, really, really productive garden in the backyard. And I kind of get it. But all the same, I'm not a lawn man myself, and I never will be. I'm more about a wild field, Anyhow, just some thoughts. Peace. Later.